disclaimer. Before we start, since we'll be discussing three very sensitive topics, which are American civil rights and slavery, religion and spirituality, and rights for those who are plural, we'd love to give you this disclaimer just so that you understand what we're going for and content that may be triggering. None of this is an exact comparison, to be clear. This is more of a study on both sides, civil rights and plural rights, and people's lived experiences and reactions to spirituality on both sides. And we're just looking at both at the same time. I'm not holding the two up as fully comparable, as they're two totally different things in different parts of history. In my eyes, the period in American history when Africans were enslaved may even be the most horrific crime to ever take place on this planet. Whatever we as individuals do to face our traumas from DID or from being plural, and the dehumanization and bullying that comes with that label at times, I do not think that it could ever compare to such a dastardly and evil event such as that. And there are awful events going on right now, even on this earth, but we'll specifically be discussing these two things: modern plurality and civil rights. However, I would like to acknowledge that those who have been traumatized from their past have often been through more than any one person ever should. And we weep with you, have quiet solace with you, and eat a tub of ice cream with you. Nothing can ever mend that kind of hole in one's life. Eventually, you just learn to live next door to it and be okay with saying hello to it just every once in a while. We are lucky to have survived, although some days we feel the opposite, and that's valid as well. And to those who have been traumatized by religion, we do give fair warning that this does include some mentions of some major religions, though we do not go into detail about them. There is also mention of the rosary. We mostly focus on spirituality as a whole, and a lesser-known religion called Hoodoo, which mostly focuses on worship of one's African-American ancestors. Hoodoo does include elements of Christianity, but we will not be showing any images of crosses or any other religious symbols. Even the symbols associated with the African deities of Hoodoo will not be shown. Native American animism is also an aspect of Hoodoo, so that will be briefly spoken about as well. The Passamaquoddy spirits will also be briefly mentioned. We do apologize for the lack of certain useful visuals, but we do not wish to trigger anyone. We ourselves have trauma related to this, so it would be triggering for us to see too. That is all. Thank you. And now, let us begin. First of all, before anything else, do you know what spirituality, faith, and belief is, at least to us? To us, they're a way of being, coping, and living. And coping can involve connecting with other people, especially those who share your faith. I'd like to share some things we and our caregiver have personally experienced just these past few weeks that relate to our own spiritual coping mechanisms. Later on, we'll go into more spiritual ways of being and living. On a side note, being and living seem pretty similar, but they are different things, and we'll explain why after these short stories. Most of all, though, we believe these aspects of living and being center around coping. We must cope with our existence somehow, and spirituality can help us with that in such a profound way. It can allow us to keep going through near anything because it can exist from nothing, and it needs nothing to keep existing. Nothing except our own willingness to believe and have faith. First was this conversation we had with our caregiver about events in our life that led us to have what we thought was a really strange belief on why those events could be happening. We'd noticed a pattern where there'd be people in our life who'd be very kind and genuine, or opportunities that were right for us, fortunate and going very well. And then, almost without fail, something overnight would happen, and that person or that opportunity would just vanish, sometimes without even a reason, as though the world itself suddenly had amnesia. Now, when we were younger, we really thought we'd gone insane when stuff like that happened. But with our best friend and caregiver around, and now having lived with us for years, he says he's noticed this pattern as well. Not only that, but when we told him our strange beliefs surrounding why we thought this might be happening, our little fringe theory, he said he sometimes thought the same thing. Now, if you're really curious, it's the belief that, just like how our personas, who are all fictive except for one of us, have boardrooms filled with capitalist-minded people, pulling strings to create most of our stories, if not all, it made us wonder if there's another world out there controlling our stories and pulling strings in some alien boardroom such that not everything makes sense to us. But it sure creates a lot of drama, you know? Yeah, I suppose that's what you'd think if you have too many edibles, but edibles are really good at helping with the pain, man. Sorry. Apart from that, we truly have a small part of ourselves that kind of believes in this, so hearing that our caregiver thought the same exact thing because of those same strange, way too consistent patterns in our life, good things happen, bad things happen immediately after, it just felt so good not to feel like it's a super abnormal delusion or just something that someone high on THC would think, because he's been sober for a while. Although, to be clear, it's okay to have delusions too. Just for many, they can be frightening, disorienting, and intrusive. It's nice for us to know in this case that our best friend has similar thoughts towards similar strange events. To know that even in someone without any history of delusional thinking, a weird series of events could create a weird theory to go along with it. Because sometimes we just cannot explain things, and that's okay. It doesn't mean having a belief means we're certain we know. It just means we believe it could be something more than nothing. And we could be wrong, but maybe not. That's the thing. Nobody knows. In this case, our belief was used to cope with a strange event. So that's our first example. The second is actually from our caregiver himself. He went to see a new therapist recently who works on the native reservation where we live. She happens to be native too. When he talked to her, he was so pleasantly surprised because she had all this knowledge about their culture, still snuck some Passamaquoddy words into her speech, and even talked to him about his beliefs in their native spirits. He always makes this distinction clear to us that they're spirits and not gods. We'll go into this later in the presentation, but Native American tribes, no matter their different stories and spirits, believe in animism. Everything has spirit in animism, so it makes sense that they're not considered gods. And we are native too, but don't know our tribe, so didn't really grow up in the culture, and our caregiver did. So luckily, he is now sort of reconnecting us with that culture, and it's a very humbling experience. So anyways, our caregiver is speaking to his therapist about his beliefs in these spirits, and he clarifies that he can believe in the wave spirit, Abodumkin, and the wind spirit, Wujausen, but not in the creator spirit, Glooscap. When he gets home, he's ecstatic to have been able to speak with her about these things, and that she snuck their language in, which he only knows a few words of, into her English speech. But he tells us that he still doesn't understand how he can believe in one sort of spirit, yet not another. Why the wind bird and the wave serpent, but not the creator man? So, we assured him that this was normal, and that it's totally okay, that everyone has different beliefs, and we likely said something more personal to him, too. But we want you all to know that there's a vast history of people believing in one part of a religion, yet not another. And it is so ickenly normal, in fact, that we can give you the biggest example and you'll know instantly what we mean. At least hopefully. This is why we see so many Christian denominations, such as Lutheran, Catholic, Protestant, Baptist, Methodist, etc. People differ on what exactly they believe in a religion or a spiritual practice, etc., and they just have since long ago. You yourselves must come to your own conclusions if you have faith in anything. And it can be a spiritual belief, religion, or any kind of faith. But you'll have to do it your way, and that's okay. Even if you say you do not have faith, that is okay too. But we ask during this presentation that those sharing their beliefs are respected. You do not have to believe, but you should not tell someone that their belief is wrong, especially just on the merit that it is a belief. Now, we'd like to explain the difference between being and living. Being is just your resting state. It's who you are, or who you all are in our case. You don't have to do anything in particular to be being. It's just a state of existence. And if you exist in a spiritual way, perhaps you believe some spirit created you, as in the Passamaquoddy creator myth, where Glooscap shoots an arrow into a birch tree, splitting the tree, then humans were said to emerge from that split. Living, however, is a lifestyle. It's how you live. What you do beyond that being. For instance, if one is a practicing Catholic, which we earlier found out is a derivative form of Christianity, you may pray the rosary, which means you do a prayer on each bead of the rosary, which is basically a holy necklace that has a very specific configuration and number of beads. And that would be a spiritual lifestyle practice because you are actively doing something in relation to your spirituality. It does not have to be something physical, however. It can be something in your mind or just something intangible, but it must be a choice and an effort over time. So I hope you understand the differences now. And thank you all, and I hope you will enjoy the rest. Human beings have belief systems, and their belief systems are based on their bodies of nature, the hows and whys of the earth, the universe, of people, and of animals too. Which is a lot, but we'll break it down, don't worry. The thing is, I feel that we as plurals, and especially those of us with DID, tend to forget how strange all human beings really are. Not just us, but everyone. The reason, by the way, that I singled out those of us with DID is because we're much more likely to have major trauma. And trauma can make us feel different from others. That's how it's always made ourselves feel too. Anyways, though, did you know our last name, our legal one, which we haven't gotten the opportunity to change since we're trans, is the name of some slaver's family who enslaved our family some 160 years ago? Yeah, that's a big part of why we want our last name to be Renewal instead. It's sort of a rebirth for us. And not just for us, but in our mind, for our ancestors as well. Those who may have died in chains, yet still carried on a legacy through someone else. We learned recently that there's a religion we don't often hear about in the United States. It's not taught in any school that we've ever been to either. Then again, we didn't get accepted into Spelman like our sister did. Well, now we'd likely go to Morehouse since we're taking our hormones, but anyways, it's called hoodoo. And hoodoo has made us think more than nearly anything else has in months. Just over the past week or so that we've been learning about it. Not counting the book we started reading 3 weeks ago called Fresh Water by Akwaeke Emezi, who grew up in Nigeria, that has certainly made us think in nearly equal capacity. Briefly, it is about a type of plural called, and excuse us if we do not pronounce all of these words correctly, but we did do our research and hope that it will suffice. Briefly, it is about a type of plural called obanje, which originates from the cultural practices of the Igbo people of Nigeria. The main character of the book, Ada, who is obanje, has spirits and other selves living inside them, which becomes a part of them. And they describe how this influences their life in this part memoir, part fiction, as the character Ada is based directly on the author, Akwaeke. But we'll talk more about Fresh Water and the Obanje later, because this book really encompasses many of our thoughts and feelings on what we're truly trying to express here. Now, in speaking more about hoodoo, hoodoo was made to help save our roots, so that we wouldn't forget who we are and were. And that's who we believe our personas or selves are too. We believe we are here to help us rediscover who we are after the major and relatively constant traumas we experienced as a child and into our adulthood. This is because, despite the fact that our body's brain chemistry and structure can change, our selves always remain or seem to remain who they are. And we know what love is, even when our body's brain does not. Hoodoo was started by African American slaves, mainly from Central Africa, who used their knowledge of African religious practices, mainly from the Yoruba religion, beliefs in deities, such as the morally gray deity of crossroads and trickery, Legba, whom I have learned the most about, along with influences from Christianity, which enslaved people were required to learn in order to start a new hybrid religion. And that is not to say they were learning it to start the religion. They were required to learn it because they had to assimilate, and they were forced to learn Christianity in order to assimilate. This new religion was one that would move with them into this mind, body, and heart-crushing situation so far away from what they knew. Eventually, however, children, generations down the line, would be born, and they would know nothing of the countries they hailed from, us included. Many of these generations, however, were still in bondage. They were born in chains from a distant land, and yet they didn't know exactly where they were from, nor why they were there. Such a cruel life warrants a faith that can equally lift one's spirits enough to at least get out of bed in the morning, enough to remember who you are and why you still fight, to one day be free. And slaves did fight. They didn't just accept servitude. Rebellion was not uncommon, and we'll get into that very soon, how religion, specifically hoodoo, could even serve as a tool in their noble rebellion. Important to note, according to some, Christian elements within hoodoo do not have to be explicitly practiced. And this is not agreed upon by practitioners, but, in any religion, you'll have people who agree on certain things, but also hoodoo can be practiced alongside most other religions, including monotheistic ones, as ancestor worship is the main practice in hoodoo, and worship is not used in the traditional sense of the word. It is unlike worshiping a specific god or deity. It is more an act of respect as one would a living person, except understanding that the deceased know more than we do and can be anywhere at once, as they are not confined to their bodies. Leaving out offerings for them, such as fresh water, flowers, decadent or favorite foods, gift items relevant to the individual, and displaying photos or paintings of that person can help show that you appreciate their constant guidance and protection, as well as their help in rituals. Praying over them is another method. Another more specific term for this is ancestor veneration. It is believed that venerating our ancestors may allow us to communicate with them easier as well, such as through dreams, visions, and signs. An example of a sign is that if butterflies are a theme in your life, a butterfly landing on your arm during a transitory period in your life may mean something to you or be interpreted as a sign from one's ancestor or ancestors. And that is just a very simple example, but, keeping it simple. In regards to ancestors in hoodoo, we are not merely a singular person, and this really is how it's regarded in the practice, as I've come to know. We are people, and then we are our ancestors, all of them, riding our coattails, sailing along behind us, watching over us, and wishing us the best for us, sometimes even guiding us as we traverse this world. We are never alone. We will always have our ancestors and everything they are that lies within us, our spirit and our body. Even if we do not provide them with gifts or have an altar, which is typical in hoodoo, dedicated to them. Even nameless ancestors, of which African Americans like us often have many, receive well wishes, respect, prayers, and gifts, especially if we use their spirits in ritual work, such as to imbue an object with energy. This practice is known as root work or conjure. The root word can encompass many things in hoodoo and other practices, so we'll also describe other uses and instances of root work as well a little later in this session. Note that root work is not only practiced in hoodoo, but is also its own practice standalone and can be practiced alongside other religious beliefs as well. The hoodoo belief in ancestor worship or veneration in itself, to us, is a form of plurality. And by us, I mean us as in us, Renewal. And it is beautiful, really. All that we are being made up of, everyone who got us here. And those people now guiding us along. Their legacy, it's living on through us. We just think that's a beautiful thing, that sort of connecting us to the ancestors that we don't even know because they're not on any census. It's so strange, but we've been practicing hoodoo-like rituals and beliefs since childhood, just by coincidence. Personally, we believe that our ancestors guided us to these practices, the religion being our birthright, as we are someone descended from African slaves. Traditionally speaking, if you have ancestors who were slaves during chattel slavery, hoodoo is technically for you. Having a religion by so-called birthright is a bit odd, but it's also a little comforting, to be honest, to know that there's something specifically for us that was passed down to us by our people. Our people. Our people. The power of that, in our opinion, may be taken for granted by folks whose heritage is more obvious and easily accessible. You see, people usually have some kind of homeland, a culture spanning centuries even, that they can call their own. African American culture is largely very recent. There is not a whole lot tying us back to our roots either, wherever all of us came from in Africa. That's not to say that there's none, though. And hoodoo is one of those things that ties us back to where we came from. The reason for this absence is that for a long time, it was literally illegal for us to celebrate and express our own cultural heritage because to certain folks in power, that felt like something dangerous, especially before abolition in 1865, when slaves in the U.S. became legally free. Moving on to our next subject, which follows in quite closely to the subject of these folks in power who do not want our heritage to be known to our people. This part and the next part are actually going to be narrated by our caregiver, Gus, who, thank you, Gus. He does so much work behind the scenes to keep us well and fed and watered and all that, because, again, we are severely disabled by a terrible disease called ME/CFS, and I wouldn't have been able to do any of this without him. So thank you very much, Gus, and here's his voice. He's a great narrator, so thank you again, and enjoy these next two parts narrated by Gus.
Even drums and horns were banned in certain states for a time, because they weren't just used for music, but also to communicate without words, and in the 1700s were used in a few notable rebellions. Though, after the drum ban, enslaved people began to simply use their bodies to drum upon, hands to clap with, or drummed with their bodies on different surfaces. Similarly, spirituals were folk songs that resonated with and were often sung by slaves and used as a form of code to help inspire rebellion, share secret messages, and assist travelers on the Underground Railroad, which was a physical, nationwide network for escaped slaves. However, contrary to the name, it was not an actual railroad. It was a series of people who would help smuggle these slaves, called conductors, often through dangerous swamplands and forests, though some would also risk stowing slaves away in their homes, using candles lit in attic windows to denote safe passage and other such silent tactics. Going back to spirituals, though, these songs held double meanings to many slaves, such as Go Down Moses, which is about Moses rescuing the Israelites from Egyptian slavery, which was viewed as a song about modern abolition. There's a line that sings, "Let my people go," that resonated so deeply that the song was banned, after fear spread that slaves would be inspired to escape or even outright rebel because of it. Some songs, as mentioned, were also instructions. Slave rescuers, again called conductors, on the Underground Railroad, like the famous Harriet Tubman, for instance, would use these folk songs as warnings or guides. Lyrics would ask people to follow the drinking gourd, for instance, or for guidance on finding the Big Dipper, and subsequently the North Star, or wade in the water to avoid vigilante and or police dogs, possibly tracking their scents. Very clever stuff, especially considering almost all of these people were illiterate. It was illegal for slaves in many southern states to read and write. Even Harriet Tubman was illiterate. She was also disabled too, from being hit hard on the head by a weight, thrown by an overseer on her plantation as a young girl. This led to a number of disabilities, including narcolepsy, which is a sleep disorder, and more, which we will soon describe. Harriet claimed being hit in the head gave her visions. When she got what seemed like seizures, blackouts, migraines, and intense cluster headaches, she saw visions of angels and visions of seeing the forest from up above, which would help guide her and her escaping passengers to safety. She is often depicted with a cane because of this, and likely to have used mobility aids to help keep her from falling. Tubman could also use the resources the forest had to offer to forage for food, create medicinal salves, and possibly even perform root work, as is common practice in hoodoo, where roots and other naturals, such as plant stems, flowers, herbs, leaves, etc., are used for their energy and physical properties. In magic rituals, such as to create mojo bags, spells, and more, it is usual, according to our research, to give the plant that was taken from an offering in return for a root or stem, or just to offer a prayer of thanks towards it to make sure there is a balanced exchange. Everything has energy or a spirit according to hoodoo, so everything should be respected as a result, even a plant's stem. I'll admit, a few of us in our system did laugh when we were watching a basic guide on hoodoo root work, and the man doing the ritual offered a plant he had cut 3 pennies as compensation. We all kind of thought, what's a plant gonna do with 3 pennies? Isn't that just litter? But hey, we have talking cartoons in our head, so what if the man wants to give his plant a few pennies for a stem? It's about the intention, anyways, according to what he said, the energy of the thing, and I'd imagine the energy of a penny is one of value and exchange, and so that's how he paid, 3 pennies for 1 stem, and making sure to trim in a way where it can grow back. It makes sense as a practice, because I'd imagine, back in Harriet's day, there were not many pennies lying around. Taking from a stem in a way that the plant can still grow back seems a more likely practice to us, specifically as this would have been practical as well as moral. Basically, treat the earth and what you take to be used in your magic how you'd want to be treated.
Speaking of Earth, though, this big, wonderful, awful blue, speckled marble, where do plurals belong on this Earth, we wonder? Will we someday have our own space carved out just for us? And where do African Americans belong on this Earth, too? If not in Africa or America. You'd think it'd be an easier question, but, well, for some reason, it's just as hard, if not harder. This is what's called an intersectional issue. We are both plural and African American, thus we feel lost on both fronts. Where is our history, our culture, and our homeland? Where are our ancestors? Why can't we know their names, and where did we come from? Why are we like this? Why are we here? Who are we? Who am I? Where do we truly belong, if anywhere? Now, these are not simple questions, and we don't truly believe we'll be answering them during this presentation. However, we are asking them now in order to ask you. Have you asked yourselves these questions at any point in time? We would like you all to consider why hoodoo has drawn us in, and so quickly and so much. It's a little piece of where we, our ancestors, came from, in Africa, mixed together with Native American and Christian spirituality, which makes us feel seen as someone whose body is part Native American, African American, and Polish. We're always trying to connect more with our ancestors too, because our birth family is shockingly silent about them, despite our mother's adoptive family having had literal binders full of family history. Part of that, though, is because enslaved people and natives weren't usually on the census much back then. If we have no home anymore, though, then we must create one. And is that not what plurality is about, too? We create homes and inhabitants for ourselves in our heads, and I don't just mean people, but I mean talking bananas, sentient colors, anthropomorphic lions, cats, dogs, turtles, whole hotels, and more. Plurality grants us family and a home that we wouldn't have otherwise. It's truly a wonder, even though it's unfortunate the trauma we've had to go through to get here. Personally, though, we don't believe our trauma caused our DID. We think it came about at birth and really became noticeable at around age 3, when we fully admit to ourselves we were plural. And it wasn't just some kind of imaginative play. Believing it was something spiritual and not an ailment, though we did not know about DID back then, really helped us to not feel so alone. And since we grew up in a mainly spiritually positive environment, that helped us believe it was a good thing, too. Still, we were so afraid to tell others. And when we finally told the very person who was so spiritually positive in our life, Our mother, ironically, she wanted to believe it was something else. Only way later did she want to somewhat respect and support plurality and DID, even showing up to our old sessions. But her abuse in general overwhelmed that, and she even began to use our DID against us, trying to claim when we were angry or emotional it was a so-called different self, even if we had not switched ourselves in that moment. And she ignored the fact that we are, I'd say, about 99% co-conscious and tend to share our memories nearly completely. But you all likely know how abusive people tend to function. They will use your strengths and weaknesses alike against you and ignore reality in favor of themselves. So do be careful who you tell, but we are still glad we told her because we would never have known how it would have turned out without finding out first. Sometimes you must bite the bullet, so to speak. And this doesn't all relate to our final message necessarily, but we just wanted to share this experience with you because, it's hard telling people about plurality, and sometimes you do regret it, but at the end of the day, our entire life before that, for years, we just twiddled our thumbs and wondered, what would it feel like if she knew, What would it feel like? Because at that point, she was our closest connection in our life. And, now that's Gus, our caretaker, or a caregiver for us. But before, it was her. And of course it backfired because she was ultimately our most central and serious abuser. But, well, I and we are still glad that we told her, because otherwise we never would have found out what it would have felt like. And now that we are in a place where we can safely identify dangers and have someone like us by our side to tell us, don't do that. We're not going to repeat the same mistakes, but at the time, there was no one around to tell us, don't do that, we would have believed. So, sometimes, stuff happens. And you gotta forgive yourself for that, because it's not your fault. And it's not yourself's fault. It is the fault of the person who takes advantage of you. Gotta remember that. Because we are just now, after our entire life, coming to terms with what she did with us. And it's been, ever since our first presentation here, we've been trying to come to terms with that. Well, our entire life, but, it really kind of started the year that we started these presentations. So, started really breaking down those barriers the most back then. So, just so you know, we're still at it, and it's going better than ever. So, you can do it. It can happen. You can heal from your trauma, and plurality can help you. It is not always the enemy. Okay, that's enough for renewal wisdom. Moving on. Going back to hoodoo now, slaves did intermingle with Native Americans, and hoodoo carries elements from Native culture, as aforementioned, including the idea of animism, which is where literally everything has a spirit, from a rock to a tree to a squirrel to you. And animism has such a place in hoodoo because natives would help slaves escape and even buy their freedom in some states. And they'd let freed slaves join their tribes, and which is why, there's often African Americans and Native Americans have some shared ancestry, and there's even such thing as the Mardi Gras Indians who, know the history of Mardi Gras, or, like the real history of Mardi Gras. It's about the coming together of Native Americans and African Americans. I implore you to look into that. Anyway, let's see. They'd let freed slaves join their tribes and even fight to free more slaves by creating armies of freedom fighters out of freed slaves who couldn't or wouldn't travel north. You know what else is part of hoodoo tradition, by the way, hailing from African culture? Spirit possession, which you guys probably sort of know about because it falls under the plural umbrella. Specifically, religious practices, though, are not classified as DID, and it says so in most of the recent DSM entries, I believe, for DID, but they are a form of plurality if they follow the rules of its criteria, because plurality is not DID. DID is a form of plurality, as is spirit possession. Singlets, allowing multiple spirits into their bodies for guidance, and especially when they need help. That really does sound like plurality, doesn't it? Because it technically is. But slaves were almost and sometimes killed for it in the past, though. Unlike us, who luckily are usually only bullied for our plurality, although it depends on where you live. At worst, we're denied economic opportunities or kicked out of a household. But enlighten us if there are, more obscure stories or, people have been lost. As far as we know, in the past, the consequences were much worse. That's our point here. We just don't want to make anyone feel like their issues are not being heard. So anyway, it's just, this is a touchy issue, right? Because comparing slavery and the civil rights movement to the issues of plurals, we don't want anyone to think that we're trying to say that our issues as plurals in the modern day compares to, that it's like a direct comparison to the issues faced by our ancestors, in these specific circumstances, because we are not trying to make a direct comparison. That would be ridiculous. But still, we've raised many parallels, and we do think these are important because both movements share certain intimate attributes, and despite the subject matters of each being quite different, the general threads being people's lack of true home or cultural space, lack of general acceptance towards spiritual/cultural practices, and a shared sense of plurality. And as someone who is both African American and plural, we felt a need to share our viewpoints on both of these subjects because of how closely intermingled they've been in our own life. Black folks in America had been hugely othered back then and largely banned And we mean almost entirely from their own religious practices. Today, we're still a minority and still feel othered. Some folks say more than before, others say less, and those who say more because it's more insidious. It's not as obvious, but some people feel it's more insidious. And you can do your own research on that. And we're not going to explain all of that. And still more claim that nothing's changed. No matter who's right, though, we've noticed anecdotally that plurals tend to feel like that too. Perhaps you have not, so we'll explain. Basically, we've noticed a large sect of plurals, especially those with DID, yet again, tend to be so worried about persecution and that the general public may view us, or just them, in a more negative way, that it causes them not to stick to their truer beliefs. It causes them even to drop their own spiritual practices or disavow anything like a plural religion. Religion, though, as you can see from Hoodoo, can unite those who are facing very alienating circumstances. So many saw black folks, and especially slaves, as less than human. And some progressives today even argue that associating spiritualism with African American history, despite the fact that it was a huge part of our history in the US, especially during slavery, but even during later parts of the civil rights movement and up into the Jim Crow era, which ended in 1965, makes it too hard to take seriously, and that it adds too much credence to the African American mystic stereotype, like the old kooky witch doctor, which I hate, or the witch hag in the swamp. I don't know why I use that voice. Dumb stuff like that. But those swamp. But those stereotypes really are sort of based in reality, oddly enough. And I really mean sort of. Let me explain. Voodoo is a real Haitian practice that was brought over to America and settled mainly in Louisiana. Unlike Hoodoo, which is an open religion, it is what's called a closed religion, meaning you can only join if you are from a family lineage or if someone initiates you into the art. And Hoodoo really did sort of make folks into modern witches, and lots of them lived in and around swamps, but it's not really the type of witch you see with the broomstick and green warts, and not the type of swamps that bubble ominously and glow green at night. No, they were just normal spiritual practitioners like those, using root work, as we mentioned, mostly to create real medicine that happened to be created from roots and plants. And a lot of those ingredients and medicinals were found in the swamps surrounding plantations. And, you know, if slaves were traveling and trying to escape, then, you know, as aforementioned, Harriet used what she could find in the swamps and bayous that she traveled through in the forest, woodlands, whatever she could find as food and medicine on the way. And like an example that we saw in a documentary about Hoodoo that we watched was praying over grandma's chicken noodle soup when a child is sick because there's no access to medicine, but if your intention is to make this soup that can heal the sick, and add like chicken stock and a good soup, it really is, it can be healing to a sick body. The combination of those things, it sort of starts this, it's like during a sports game, if you wear your red hat to the game, your team wins, and who's to say it doesn't work, right? You just know if you do it, it seems to work. Slaves had to make their own medicine because very few slavers would actually treat the ailments of their slaves, which is just unimaginably cruel, but our people adapted. That was their spiritual lifestyle. And my system and our way is a way of being. We are a spiritual system. Our way of being is that we came from a place we cannot explain, and that we strongly believe it is a spiritual origin. Some kind of miracle that has helped us in our life to overcome our racist mother and our terrifying, abusive, neglectful upbringing, so that we can renew ourselves despite all that and still be who we were meant to be. We feel as though if our ancestors can vibe with hoodoo, then why can we not use our own religious and or spiritual beliefs to guide our own journeys? It makes enough sense to us. Why must it matter what the naysayers think? They will dislike us, just as they disliked our ancestors, no matter what. And that, friends, is their issue. It is their issue entirely, just as it was our mom's issue. And if they do hurt us because of their prejudices, we should band together, just as our ancestors did too. Well, maybe they're not your ancestors, but we're all plurals, so, For now, though, misinformation is already everywhere. I don't like that. There's misinformation everywhere, from cartoons to comics to actual medical journals to YouTube videos to people's heads just running around thinking it's whatever the heck they think it is. I definitely didn't swear just then. Anyways, misinformation is already everywhere. Stopping the spread of that is useless. It already did spread, and it is still going to. Is allowing someone to believe plurals can be spiritual misinformation anyways? We do not believe so. It does not take away from those who suffer trauma and experience DID as a result. If someone cannot learn the distinction between the two, they will already destined not to understand regardless. This is the sad truth. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. One side should not pull the other under a bus in order to further their goals. That is our belief, and that is mainly the true message of this program. Okay, now let us test our voice with the longest segment of our program. Going back to the book Fresh Water by Akwaeke Emezi, which, if you all can even recall, it was so long ago, is part autobiography, part fiction, about Obanje named Ada. Here's a brilliant, soul-chilling quote by MSE from the very first chapter and the very first words of that chapter in Fresh Water. I have lived many lives inside this body. I lived many lives before they put me in this body. I will live many lives when they take me out of it. End quote. The Obanji are what we would consider a type of plural. We would like to stress this does not mean DID. It simply means that Obanji experience categorically falls under the vast and beautiful plural umbrella. In this case, however, Obanji are actually outcasts, labeled from birth or from early childhood before puberty, and they are said to be children who house reincarnated spirits. Often, these spirits are of deceased family members or even members of extended family. The idea of Obanje originates from the Igbo people of Nigeria, Akweke Emezi, who was, as they say, born and raised in Nigeria, is also Obanje and Igbo. Akweke Emezi also identifies as transgender, non-binary, and queer, which has informed much of their writing and its themes of liminality and intersectionality. In other words, the in-between. We ourselves have shared in past years a presentation partly about how our own intersectional issues in life relate to our plurality. That is, as a trans, disabled, queer, mixed, human being who is also a plural. Did I already say plural? I can't remember. Sorry. If something's not written down, our brain, after a certain time of night, just don't do it. Alright, this is long. Don't let us ramble during this section. Audience, please. Use all of your vibes from whenever this is broadcasted. Use all of your vibes. Do not let me ramble during this section, please. Pray for me. Okay, I'm sorry. Akweke Emezi has expressed that Ada's story is not one of DID, or dissociative identity disorder, as some have tried to co-opt, although we desperately need more stories on the lived and fictional experiences and stories of those with DID. This is not one of those stories. This is a story... Oh, and by the way, sorry, I'll stop here, but even though this isn't technically one of those stories, if you do suffer from DID, you will likely still find yourself relating very heavily to this story. So, just a disclaimer, this is the book Fresh Water. It is a heavy read. Do not pick up this book if you are easily triggered. There is violence in this story. There are graphic things in this story, but if you are plural and you're willing to read something that may be triggering, it is a fantastic story. By far and away, in our honest opinion, the best plural narrative we have ever had the pleasure of reading, and we are not fully done with the book. We're about halfway through, but thus far, it is the best ever plural narrative we have ever halfway read. I'm sorry, we wanted to finish it before the presentation, but by the time the presentation comes around, we will likely be done. But during this recording, we were only halfway done, so we apologize. Moving on, not going to interrupt again, very sorry. This is a story of Ada, and in many ways, Akweke Emezi, who again are both Obanje, and instead of looking at Ada's plurality using the medical model, which certainly has its place, as medium author psychologist Dr. Ava Sprecher argues, Dr. Sprecher also tells us that in her reading, Freshwater truly taught her how important it is to look at people's psychology from their own personal and cultural lenses in order to find proper healing and inner peace in their own being. Sometimes the medical model cannot go far enough in this way, such as in Freshwater when Ada is in the United States and sees a therapist to try and help with all the chaos in her head and in her life. Unfortunately, they cannot find the words to express themselves, and the therapist, not having knowledge of their cultural background, just does not fully understand the scope of what they are saying. She simply cannot connect with Ada the way Ada needs and deserves. In this case, the medical model has gotten in the way of Ada's healing journey, the opposite of what it was supposed to do. For being Obanje has caused a rift between their inner and outer lives, and their life has been fraught with trauma from the very beginning, as even in the very first few chapters, and trigger warning, I'm about to mention something that involves physical harm. Ada's little sister gets struck by a vehicle while crossing the street distractedly and nearly passes away. And warning. Luckily, she survives the incident, but Ada believes it to be the fault of the spirit living within them, and the fact that them being Obanje is supposed to cause chaos within their family. There's sort of a stigma attached to it, and in their culture. Many more traumas unfortunately happen. And many more spirits or selves begin to inhabit Ada's body as a result. To us, the crux of Dr. Sprecher's Medium article and Freshwater's message is that being seen as who we are, and not through a lens that was designed somewhere far away just to analyze us from some very detached perspective, is so incredibly valuable and cathartic, and it can even be healing. We see through Ada's perspective throughout Freshwater, and that is exactly what the author intends. In order to understand such intersectional issues as Ada and Emezi have experienced, one must step into their shoes. One cannot even begin to understand in any other way. And both Ada and Emezi have understood their plurality through spiritual belief systems. The first spirit housed within Ada's body, within the framework of Obanje, is a deity in the Odinani belief system of the Igbo people, called the excuse me if I say this wrong, the Allah. That is not to be confused with Allah, which is considered the one true God in an Islamic religion. Note, this means that Islam is a monotheistic religion. Monotheistic meaning the belief that there is only one God, unlike in Islam. In Ottanani, there are many gods, making it a polytheistic belief system. It's just a fun fact for you. To continue with Ada and Allah. Allah is a god of creation, specifically associated with the python, which is a snake, as well as the crescent moon. She rules over the underworld. Her womb holds their people's ancestors within it. Her name translates to earth, as in the world, not like dirt, but like, the earth, the globe. She is a god of fertility and judgment, reincarnation, judging people's morality. Allah is the most revered and highest Alusi, or deity of all, in Igbo myth. Allah is the most revered and highest Alusi, or deity of all, in Igbo myth. Ada's name, according to Freshwater, in its truest form, unquote, means the egg of a python, unquote, as though Emezi wanted to intertwine myth with reality and make it as though Allah joining with Ada were something of destiny. This reminds us deeply of our own experiences, feeling like our plurality was destiny too. We created our own belief system, and it evolved over time before we even knew about or identified with DID as a medical diagnosis. We were eventually diagnosed with DID as we fit the diagnostic criteria. However, we and the mental health care professional who diagnosed us, who was first and foremost a professional anthropologist who focused on studying Native American culture, lived in the American Southwest, and very often would speak intimately with living tribal members to get their side of things, agree to our plurality, and agree that our plurality to us, it is a spiritual thing, and that seeing it in such a way is not something bad, that's just how we see it. And in order to promote the healing of our traumas, which are as enmeshed with our plurality as every other aspect of our life. And when you have such deep and layered trauma, even seeing something so simple as colored construction paper, a tropical bird, or fall leaves may set you off. Both us and our therapists will have to approach our plurality from how we've seen it all our life, because that's how this mess started, and that's the only way it can ever even begin to unravel. Think of it this way. If you believe someone laid a hex on you, and a therapist tells you that hexes aren't real and it's just your head, would that make the hex go away? And this is given that you're privileged enough to have access to a therapist. I mean, this can be done on one's own. However, if possible, when one is facing trauma severe enough to hurt their quality of life, seeking out mental help is recommended. Whether that is through a therapist, psychologist, or psychiatrist, research must be done on one's own and to figure out which is right for you or yourselves. Anyways, though, in the event that one is lucky enough to have access to therapy, what if you shared your culture or personal beliefs with your therapist, or found a new therapist who shares your culture with you? Well, if you're lucky enough to find one. This means that you're now both on the same page, and you can find a way to break the hex in a way that makes sense to you personally and fits in with your own system of beliefs. Over a series of sessions, where you pour out your feelings as though a gateway has opened after the hex-breaking ritual, you feel lighter, freer. The hex no longer has a hold over you anymore. Who is to say if it was real or not? That is not the correct question. The question is this: how can we start to heal? Or maybe this: how can we begin to understand? Or this: how can we truly express ourselves or ourselves? And, that's just a hypothetical situation I made up, but you probably wouldn't go to a therapist for a hex, but what even is a hex? I don't know. But, I'm just saying, if you go and say that you have a mental problem, but it's based on a spiritual problem, from your perspective, then, you're going to have to unravel things from a spiritual perspective, because even if it's, causing you a mental effect that is known in psychology, such as trauma, that's a known psychological effect, but, the basis of the thing that's causing you trauma, it has a spiritual basis, then you're going to have to face that trauma from a more of a spiritual level. And that is what I'm trying to say here, is that, in psychology, I've learned a lot from my therapist herself, and I'm not going to say her name, but she's brilliant, and she has taught me that, a professional is honestly more... Okay, well, I know so many of you have had these awful experiences, and I am so sorry, and I did too before I met my therapist. But there are professionals out there who understand and who know that it is not professional to just tell you that is not real. What's in your head is not real, because that is not actually how it's supposed to go. What is supposed to happen is more such as in the scenario that I described, where, they work with you, and from your perspective, or in the Medium article that, I'll link on my sources, where there is this bridge between the medical model and how we as humans see things from a more natural and inquisitive perspective, a more, just a more, just like a lesser one-size-fits-all perspective. We all see the world different. We all grow up thinking different things about how the world is, why the world is. It's not, we don't all think this is the brain chemical that is activating this blah blah blah. That is why I'm thinking this. That is not how people think. And thus, we don't even know how certain things happen or why certain things happen. Who knows if such XYZ thing is true? We don't know the origination of consciousness and whatnot, and so people fill in the gaps with whatever they believe and such. And it is not a therapist's job or a psychologist or a psychiatrist's job to tell you what is filled in that gap, but so you need to meet halfway. The humanity in you needs to meet them halfway. Am I explaining this right? I hope so. I'm just rambling now. I said I wouldn't ramble. I'm so sorry. Anyway, I'm getting back on track again. Right. Spirituality and religion naturally appear within humanity's history to explain various things, or perhaps as a way to show how things actually occurred. Either way, we use it as a lens to see through, just as the medical model is a lens with which to see the world through. But as the medical model is so impersonal and so one size fits all, it sometimes forgets the more human aspects of psychology, and psychology itself is so achingly human, the study of the human mind, that this flaw is too painful to overlook. This is something we must adapt to and work with. Some kind of change must occur in the way this one-size-fits-all system currently applies in the West. And at least, again, academically speaking, this is not supposed to apply, and yet in practice we see or hear about many practitioners seemingly applying this. And maybe that's because their schooling was many decades ago, but for whatever reason it may be, it needs to be undone. Western medicine is not the end-all be-all of knowledge in this world, despite just how much it has helped us help others and understand the human mind and body. It has, without a doubt, saved lives. It has also ended them through cruel and even racist experiments, not just on animals, but on people, such as the forced sterilization of Black women in the U.S., which is well documented and a practice that has only ended, that we know of, in our current century. But regardless, we would not, for instance, trade Planned Parenthood, an institution that began with racist founders, for having no family planning organization in the United States. Well, perhaps some would, but we wouldn't. You can recognize the cruelty and ineptitude of individuals, yet see a wider purpose for something like medical research, which is not always unethical, and we would like to claim usually is not. Such is the same with religion, which has caused major strife at times throughout the world, maybe even consistently throughout history. Yet, arguably, it has helped more people than it has hurt. More people practice religion than don't across the world, and by a wide margin, over 80%, according to Pew Research in 2012. We're not saying having a spiritual or religious belief is superior either. Not by any means. Just that if so many people are religious, the amount of people so wholly dedicated and the conflicts that may arise from it then makes sense. It's not some loud minority. No, this is how the majority of the world seems to function, and has for thousands of years. Plurals and those with DID are people, just like anyone else. And inside of us house even more people, or even non-people who are still sentient beings, or, depending on your view, aspects or parts of a person. And we all, being our own sentient beings, are much like the rest of humanity, meaning it is likely we follow this same pattern as a group, especially since plurals come from all walks of life. Plurality does not discriminate, although statistically DID is seen more in women, but we do not yet know why. So anyway, Many of us are likely to have our own spiritual or religious beliefs, even outside of our plural identities. Even within ourselves, different selves can hold different beliefs, such as, one of us can be Buddhist, another of us can be atheist, etc., etc. However, we as plurals have also formed our own more unique beliefs, and we'll get right into that in the conclusion of our presentation, which I'm sure you are all desperately waiting for, because you either have to pee or you're tired of this. Or maybe you're enjoying it, I don't know. Anyways. Conclusion. Plurals have their own spiritual beliefs. They have their own religious beliefs too, practically. Think about the entire region of endogenic plurality, tulpas, and more. Some of these are derived from and related to other religions, but that is how so many religious practices are created, as we also touched upon earlier. Another example of this is Sikhism, which rose out of both Hinduism, which is the oldest known human religion, and Islam, which is an Abrahamic religion, along with Christianity and Judaism, all three of which believe the prophet Abraham received divine knowledge beginning their faith. Point being, it is possible to derive something from a known source, yet still have your own thing going on. Us plurals with fictive selves know that pretty well, huh? That's not even to mention fictives, factives, and just random headmates who pop up and then perhaps go away, and some believe them to be actual spirits or entities who just come to visit our heads. There are also those whose headmates believe they travel between different heads and actually learn and grow by doing so. On both ends even, as in both people's systems learn more about each other and about different perspectives. And we've also heard of plurals who fit plurality into the framework of existing religions they practice without really inventing something of their own, but just making the religion accessible and acceptable towards plurals and plurality. And if you have any instances of these that you'd like to share with us, then feel free to. There's a lot we're likely missing here, but basically, plurals already have a lot of spiritual practices that many do perform. Perhaps maybe without even realizing it, as it's just something that they do. Like with us, it's just a way of being. We get these random walk-ins too, where there will be someone in our head we don't recognize, or maybe someone we do, and we actually believe they may not be us or our own mind, because it just doesn't feel like our mind. And it truly feels like friends and family from our old lives, as we call them. Some call it source, as in the source material their fictive selves originated from. And no, perhaps we're not formally together or organized enough to really constitute a religion at the moment, but we've just heard the stories of so many plurals who have these same or similar experiences, and whether it's all in our heads or not, which again is not necessarily the correct question, it seems to be some part of our plural community that's here to stay, and something that's going to be experienced consistently by a subset of people. And we are glad, damn glad to be a part of it, because this isn't totally new. It comes from spiritual practices such as spirit possession, tulpomancy, and more that have existed for perhaps thousands of years, just as long as known religion has. See, we're almost recollecting ourselves here. Like Renewal, under the banner of plurality, of tulpas, of DID and other labels using the modern internet. And we're glad to be a part of this recollection of peoples, really. And we're just here to share today how, as peoples, we deserve to express all, let me say that again, all of our humanity. And a big, huge, gigantic part of humanity is spirituality and religion. And just like DID and plurality as a whole, it remains somewhat unexplained at its core. Where do we truly come from? Who are we really? Why are we really here? How are we really here? Why are we oppressed if we're here? Why are we going through all this trauma? Who the heck chose this life for us, huh? That's a bunch of BS. These are things a large majority of people ask themselves, and things plurals deserve to be able to ask too. Because let's face it, there is no spiritual or religious path yet that is both by and for plurals, such that there are paths that have aspects that happen to fit somewhat into plural space, such as spirit possession and tulpomancy. So we welcome all of you to your own spiritual beliefs, ideas, practices, coping mechanisms, and lifestyles, since we as people may not be complete without them. Do not be afraid to be seen as too weird, but there is nothing arguably more human than religion, baby. Over 80%, man. I don't know what else to tell you. So anyway, either see you next year, like the year after that, or like maybe I'm like a cicada now because of our illness. So see you in like 7 years or whatever. Okay, I love you. Bye.